that's me. So I already expected quite some overlap between my presentation and the previous two, because we're all talking on public engagement related to a similar topic, and that's why I decided to dive a little bit more into the how. So how do we actually do these kinds of studies, because there's a lot of non-social scientists in the room, and it might be a way to show you that it's actually also solid science, and that it's really something that has to be incorporated into your projects. And that's why RamonCo, I think, is such a cool project. Because RamonCo is a project that's interdisciplinary and that's focused on developing a risk-based framework for assessing CO2 storage monitoring, but it includes different, well, all kinds of different fields that are currently divided into 3 work packages. So we have the forward modeling, my work package, the societal environmental concerns, and then also the 3rd, more technical work package on information analysis for CO2 storage and assessment. And the idea is that we need all these different fields combined to accelerate the safe deployment of CCS through improved monitoring and risk assessment. And unsurprisingly, I'll be going into the 2nd work package today to give you an insight on how that looks from our side. But Arvid's also here to answer any questions on the more technical work packages. So why a focus on societal risk? We believe that technological innovation on its own is not enough, and I think today was actually a perfect example of all the reasons why it's also important to look beyond. That's why we at TNO, together with a lot of different partners, developed the cell theory, which is better known as the societal embeddedness level framework. And it's a way in which we kind of try to visualize societal innovation along the technological readiness level terms. So we all know the TRL levels, and we believe that you can somehow also create insight in societal readiness, essentially, to uptake technology. And we do so by focusing on 4 different categories. So impact on surroundings of the technology, involvement of stakeholders, legislation and regulation, and market and financial resources. And as you can see, we linked 4 different cell levels, so societal embeddedness levels, to the 9 different TRL levels. And this way we try to kind of make tangible how ready society is for potential uptake of a new technology. This is the underlying framework that we use in the RamonCo Work Package 2, with the central question: what risks exist for societal embedding across the CCS technology chain? And our outcomes are risk management strategies, essentially for policymakers, but also more broadly support for policy regulation and decision making and CCS, and in general an increased focus on public perception. I'm going through this a bit quickly because, like everyone, I prepared too many slides. Our research approach consists of mixed methods. So we're combining surveys, interviews, focus groups, and expert groups to get a 360-degree view on all the risks for societal embeddedness of CCS. This means that we did a survey with the public, but we're also talking to all kinds of different professional stakeholders from the field. We have an expert group that consists of different scientists that are active in the field. And every year we catch up with these different groups of people. Moreover, we do so in 5 different countries. So we're currently working in Norway, the Netherlands, Germany, Romania, and Greece, where we're all applying the same methods in order to identify the most relevant risks that we currently see along the CCS chain. There are a couple of different stages to our project. As you can see, we're somehow right in the middle, but that also means that currently we have already identified all, we like to say, but possibly most of the risks that we see to public acceptance, and we're currently trying to translate those to risk management strategies, which is proving to be quite a challenge, and I'll show you in a little bit why. And I'm going to start out by presenting some content of the case studies. First, some results from the public survey and how we got to those. And secondly, some results from the focus groups. The public survey was with just the general public, citizens from all of the 5 countries. It looked into the risks and concerns that these citizens have when it comes to CCS. And secondly, I'm going to show you some of the results from the focus groups that had professional stakeholders from different points of view. So we did the survey in 5 countries, but the results from Romania are still pending. We had over 1,000 respondents in each country, and we asked a lot of different questions related to CCS. Important to note is that the first half of the survey, we did not give the respondents any prior knowledge. Halfway throughout the survey, they received knowledge on CCS, and afterwards they had to answer the second half of the question to see if this information would change anything when it came to their answers. And some example questions were, just to give you an idea of what these surveys look like, to what extent do you disagree or agree with the following? Technological innovation will eventually solve our problems. Or on a 5-point scale, are you concerned about CCS? How concerned are you? And citizens always had the question, or respondents always had the question to answer, the answer option, I don't know. This in the end led to 9 different models, and we call it a model because we have these different statements that we can actually explain based on variables, so on characteristics of the respondents. And these variables looked into the general perception the respondents had of CCS, but also very specifically on different parts of the CCS chain. Implementation questions, and these are not represented in the slides, but we also asked them, for example, about voting in a referendum, considering a project that would take place in their neighborhood possibly, which led to very interesting results. Each of these 9 models we tried to explain based on these variables, which means that essentially we asked the question, does gender have an influence on people's answers for each of these statements? Or does how close the respondent live to industry have an impact on their answer on one of these statements? What you get then is something like this, which essentially shows you the statement, are you mainly positive or negative about CCS? Then these numbers represent all the variables that we mentioned on this slide. And essentially, well, we see now that people are generally neutral or positive. This is for the Netherlands, by the way. When it comes to their general perception on CCS. And here we see for all of these variables whether or not they prove to be a determinant in this question. And here we see that a belief that people have that technology will solve problems, unsurprisingly, a stronger belief in techno fixes leads to a higher and more positive attitude when it comes to CCS. We also see that previous knowledge, or people that have heard about CCS and know what it is, tend to be more negative about CCS, which in my opinion is an interesting finding because this leads us to ask questions about the kind of information that we are spreading. And then to a lesser extent, we see that people with a higher level of education tend to be more positive, and somehow people aged 50 or between 50 and 59 tend to be less positive, but this of course can also be a coincidence. So this is what the research looks like when you talk about these surveys. Then to compare some of the findings that we see in the countries, well, overall in Germany, Greece, the Netherlands and Norway, people tend to be on the more positive side of the spectrum when we ask them, are you positive or negative towards CCS? We see that Germany is slightly more negative than the other countries represented, and Norway actually is a little bit more positive. But when we ask about the support for implementation, we see that actually the answers shift to the more negative side of the spectrum. So hypothetically, people are positive, tend to be positive about CCS. When we actually asked about the implementation, we see a shift towards a more negative attitude, which is interesting because it's exactly the same people as we asked before. We see that the differences per country are not extreme, but it strikes that Norway is slightly more positive than the others. Then we also asked about specific concerns for different parts of the value chain. Here again, you have the same countries, and we have the different parts of the value chain. You see that none of the countries is expressing in an average, right? It's all average per country. Very, very extreme attitudes. So they're all clustered in the more moderate part of the spectrum. We do see some striking differences between countries, where the Netherlands and Norway tend to be overall a bit less concerned than Germany and Greece. We also see that concern is highest when we talk about storage, and that actually for offshore and onshore storage in all our studies so far, there's not really a big difference, which is interesting in my opinion. Yeah? Then this is a completely different kind of graph. Don't look at the numbers because you don't have to understand them. It just shows that if you run a model and you ask for the country as a determinant, we see that actually it really matters where the respondents live. So we get a statistically significant value for country where people live, so country of nationality of the respondent essentially, which actually shows why these comparative studies are useful, because apparently the settings, the attitudes, the perceptions are not the same in each country. They're actually statistically significantly different when we look at these countries. What really popped out in the study is that concern is by far the highest for physical manifestations when it comes to CCS technology. So people are most afraid when we talk about leakage, or concerned, afraid is a bit of a strong term, most concerned when we talk about leakage and tremors in general. And here again we see that Netherlands and Norway express less concern than Germany and Greece, which is interesting to see. And we also see that overall, groundwater is a recurring theme in all of these studies. But a takeaway message from this is that what proved to be to cause most concern was actually the physical manifestations. We asked tons and tons and tons of these questions, so I'm only showing some of the highlights. Please come back to me if you want all of the results. We also asked questions, of course, on policy and governance, where we see that people actually agree with most of the statements that we asked. And in this case, that means, for example, that they agree with compensation for people that live near CCS sites. But very notable is that in all countries, they very strongly agree with only with CCS that being only in addition to emission reduction efforts. Let's see, so that's the type of results that you would expect. Then we also did some focus groups, which was a term that we heard mentioned several times during the previous presentations. Essentially what a focus group is, you get a group of stakeholders, relevant stakeholders, together in a room, and you ask them questions, let them discuss, you write down all of the results, and you hope that there's something useful in there. Practically, right now we've done several sessions of focus groups, focusing on the risks on several parts of the CCS chain. And the results so far have been the most important risks according to professional stakeholders when it comes to CCS. The results that you get then look something like this, which of course I'm not expecting you to read, but we then hope to translate those to something like this. So here we see the most prominent risks and concerns that professional stakeholders in the Netherlands have when it comes to CCS. For example, alignment of investment decisions is a recurring theme, permitting, and all the regulatory uncertainties tend to be a theme that comes back. So if you have this massive, massive bulk of knowledge on all the risks and concerns that people are seeing, what do you do with them? Currently we're trying out something new. This is a bow tie diagram that we know from technical risk analysis, and we're trying to apply it to societal risk, which actually hasn't been done before, and we don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign, but we're trying it anyway. So we're using all of the data that we've gathered as input for this bow tie analysis, and based on that, we are essentially defining all of the potential sources of risks that could take place, but also all the potential control measures. And the risk in this case is, of course, not societal acceptance, so people that start protesting. Based on this, we also identify consequences and possible measures for recovery. And the output will be a risk dynamic diagram, so an overview of all of the societal risks and how they interact. And these will be elaborated on and described further in risk management strategies. This looks something like this, which I'm not going to go into detail now, but we have 12 of these bow ties for different risks when it comes to societal engagement. And in the upcoming months, we're trying to verify these bow ties. So do all the stakeholders that I previously mentioned actually recognize these risks? Do they also think the measures that were identified are realistic, feasible? Based on that, we'll also make the bow ties country specific, because of course policy recommendations will have to be country specific. After the verification, we'll get started with risk governance strategies that will be input for policy on national level for all of the participating countries. We're not done. It's an ongoing project, so if you have any questions or ideas, I'll be around. Feel free to approach me. I'll be here. Thanks.